Hello, and welcome to this peaceful space tonight. As you settle into wherever you are, perhaps your bed, maybe a comfortable chair, or even just lying on the floor, I want you to know that you're exactly where you need to be right now. There's no performance required here, no mask to wear, no energy you need to summon that you don't already have. If you're here listening to this, chances are you know something about anger that many people don't understand. You know about the kind of rage that seems too big for your body, too intense for the situation, too persistent for comfort. Maybe you've been told you're too sensitive or too reactive. Maybe you've been encouraged to just let it go, or think positive thoughts. And maybe, like so many others, you've started to believe that this rage makes you somehow broken or bad. Tonight, I want to offer you a different possibility. What if the rage you carry isn't a flaw in your character, but a response that makes perfect sense? What if it's not something wrong with you, but something trying to protect you? What if beneath all that fire, there's actually a profound wisdom your system has developed to keep you safe? You have permission tonight to stop trying to fix yourself. You have permission to stop apologizing for the intensity of your emotions. You have permission to be exactly as angry as you are, without shame, without judgment, without the exhausting work of pretending otherwise. This isn't about becoming more angry or less angry. It's about understanding why the anger is there and what it's been trying to tell you all along. And here's something else you have permission for. You don't have to have all the answers tonight. You don't have to emerge from this experience healed or transformed or any other word that feels like pressure. You just need to be here, breathing, listening, letting your nervous system know that for the next hour or so, you're safe enough to explore what's been true for you. Anger is perhaps the most misunderstood emotion in our emotional landscape. We live in a culture that has deeply complicated relationships with anger, simultaneously glorifying it in movies and media while shaming it in real life, especially in women, children, and anyone who doesn't fit the narrow mold of who's allowed to be angry. But here's what decades of psychological research have shown us. Anger is information. It's your internal alarm system, your boundary detector, your justice radar. When you feel that surge of rage, your nervous system is saying, pay attention. Something important is happening here. Something needs to be addressed. The pioneering psychologist Carl Jung wrote extensively about what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've learned to hide or reject. For many people, anger lives in this shadow space, pushed down and pushed away because we've learned it's not safe, not acceptable, not nice. But Jung understood something profound. What we reject in ourselves doesn't disappear. It grows stronger in the darkness, more volatile, more unpredictable. Modern trauma research, led by experts like Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and Dr. Gabor Maté, has deepened our understanding even further. They've shown us that rage often isn't just about the present moment. It's the accumulated weight of all the times we couldn't say no, couldn't fight back, couldn't protect ourselves or others we loved. It's what trauma specialist Dr. Rizma Menachem calls weathering, the way our bodies hold the storms we've endured. And here's something that might surprise you. Much of the rage you carry might not even have originated with you. Family therapist Mari Bowen's groundbreaking work showed us how emotions and reactions can be passed down through generations, like invisible inheritances we never asked for. The anger you feel might be connected to your grandmother's silenced voice, your father's unexpressed grief, your ancestors' unprocessed trauma. This doesn't mean your anger isn't valid. It means it's even more understandable than you might have realized. You're not just carrying your own story. You're carrying the story of everyone who came before you, who also had to swallow their rage, who also had to smile when they wanted to scream, who also had to be nice when what they really needed was to roar. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability and shame has illuminated another crucial piece. We often feel the most shame about the emotions that feel the most powerful, the most uncontrollable. Rage can feel like it might consume us or hurt others, so we learn to fear it, to fight it, to hide it even from ourselves. But Brown's work shows us that the emotions we shame are often the ones that most need our compassion and understanding. Tonight, we're going to approach your anger not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a wise messenger that's been trying to get your attention. We're going to explore it not with judgment, but with curiosity, not with the goal of making it disappear, but with the intention of understanding what it's been trying to protect, what boundaries it's been trying to establish, what truths it's been trying to speak. This approach isn't about justifying harmful behavior or saying that all expressions of anger are healthy. It's about understanding that the emotion itself, that surge of energy, that sense of this isn't right, is fundamentally adaptive. It's your system's way of mobilizing you to protect what matters most. Now, as we begin to settle more deeply into this exploration, I want to be clear about our approach tonight. We're not going to excavate every painful memory or analyze every trigger. We're not going to overwhelm your system with more than it's ready to handle. Instead, we're going to move slowly, gently, with the kind of patience you might show a frightened animal, because part of you that carries this rage has been frightened, has been protecting you in the only way it knew how. Think of tonight as creating a safe laboratory for your inner world. Like any good scientist, we're going to observe before we change anything. We're going to get curious about the patterns, the triggers, the protective strategies your system has developed. And we're going to do all of this from a place of appreciation, rather than criticism. As you continue to settle in, take a moment to notice your breathing. You don't need to change it, just notice it. Notice how your chest rises and falls, how the air moves in and out of your body. This is your anchor tonight. This simple, reliable rhythm that's been with you since the moment you were born. If at any point during our time together you feel overwhelmed, come back to this breath. Come back to the simple fact that you're here, you're breathing, you're safe in this moment. Your system has incredible wisdom about how much it can handle and when it needs to slow down. Trust that wisdom tonight. Let your body find whatever position feels most comfortable. Maybe you need to adjust your pillow. Maybe you need to shift your legs. Maybe you need to pull a blanket a little higher. Your comfort matters here. Your body's needs matter here. The rage you carry has often developed because your needs and comfort weren't prioritized somewhere along the way. Tonight, we're changing that pattern, even in small ways. And as you settle, begin to let go of any agenda you might have brought with you tonight. Maybe you came here hoping to fix your anger, or to understand it completely, or to emerge somehow transformed. All of those intentions are beautiful, but tonight, let's set them gently aside. Instead, let's approach this time with what Buddhist teacher Pema Chödrön calls don't know mind, the willingness to be curious without needing to have all the answers. Your anger has been with you for a reason. It served a purpose, even if that purpose isn't immediately clear. Tonight, we're going to honor that purpose while also exploring whether there might be new ways to meet the same needs, gentler ways to maintain the same boundaries, more sustainable ways to protect what matters most to you. Here's a truth that might feel revolutionary. Your anger is not evidence that you're broken. It's evidence that you're human, that you have a nervous system that responds to threat and injustice, that some part of you has never stopped believing that you and others deserve better treatment than you've received. Think about this for a moment. If you had no capacity for anger, you would have no internal alarm system for boundary violations. You would have no emotional response to injustice, no internal mobilization when something precious to you was threatened. The complete absence of anger isn't peace. It's disconnection from your own protective instincts. But here's where it gets complicated. Many of us learned early that our anger wasn't safe to express. Maybe you grew up in a household where anger was dangerous, where someone else's rage dominated the space and there was no room for yours. Maybe you learned that good children don't get angry, that anger would cost you love or safety or belonging. So you learned to suppress it, to smile instead of scream, to turn the anger inward where it became depression or anxiety or self-criticism. Or maybe you learned to express it in ways that felt safer, through sarcasm or passive aggression, or people-pleasing that burned with resentment underneath. What I want you to understand tonight is that all of these strategies made sense. They were brilliant adaptations by a system that was trying to keep you connected, safe, and loved. Your anger didn't disappear when you learned to hide it. It just went underground, like a river that seems to vanish but is still flowing beneath the surface, carving new channels, finding new ways to move. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage." Tonight, we're going to approach your anger as one of these dragons, not something to be slayed, but something to be understood, perhaps even befriended. This doesn't mean we're going to encourage you to act on every angry impulse or to express rage in ways that harm yourself or others. It means we're going to develop a different relationship with the energy itself, one based on curiosity rather than fear, compassion rather than shame, wisdom rather than reactivity. As we move forward, remember that healing doesn't happen in straight lines. It happens in spirals, in circles, in rhythms that honor the complexity of human experience. Some nights the rage might feel overwhelming. Other nights it might be barely noticeable. Both experiences are valid. Both are part of your journey. Tonight, we begin with the simple recognition that your anger carries information, that it has been trying to protect something precious in you, and that it deserves to be met with the same compassion you would offer any other part of yourself that has been working so hard to keep you safe. Maybe you know the feeling of sitting in a meeting, listening to someone dismiss an idea you care about, and feeling that familiar heat rise in your chest. Your jaw tightens, your hands clench under the table, but you smile and nod because that's what's expected. Later, driving home, you find yourself replaying the conversation, thinking of all the things you should have said, your anger now mixed with frustration at yourself for staying silent once again. Or perhaps you recognize this moment. You're helping someone again, even though you're already stretched thin, already exhausted, already running on empty. They ask in that way that doesn't really feel like asking, that assumes your yes, that takes your availability for granted. And there it is, that surge of resentment that you immediately feel guilty about because you should want to help. You should be grateful they need you. You should be better at boundaries by now. Maybe you've experienced that particular rage that comes with injustice, watching someone be treated unfairly, seeing systems that protect the wrong people, witnessing cruelty or indifference while others look away. Your whole body responds as if you're under personal attack, even when it's not happening to you directly. You feel that ancient call to fight, to protect, to make things right. But often you're told you're overreacting or too invested in things that aren't your business. That moment when someone interrupts you for the third time in one conversation, and you notice how your voice gets smaller instead of louder, how you apologize for speaking, even as the anger builds inside you, like pressure in a kettle. You wonder why you can't just speak up, why you can't demand the respect you give others so freely, why your anger turns inward into shame instead of outward into assertion, or that flash of rage when someone questions your competence, your intelligence, your right to take up space, especially if you're someone who's been marginalized, who's had to prove yourself over and over, who's tired of being underestimated. The anger feels ancient, connected to every time you've been dismissed, every time you've had to work twice as hard for half the recognition, the rage that comes with being misunderstood, with having your intentions questioned, with being painted as the villain in someone else's story when you know your heart. You know your truth. You know how hard you've tried to do the right thing. This anger carries not just frustration, but grief. The grief of not being seen clearly, of not being trusted, of having your goodness called into question. And then there's the anger that surfaces when you see others getting away with things you never could. When you watch people be careless with opportunities you would treasure. When you witness waste or entitlement while you've always had to be careful, always had to earn everything twice. This rage carries the weight of fairness, of justice, of a universe that sometimes seems random in its distributions of ease and struggle. Maybe, the particular fury that comes with betrayal. Not just the dramatic betrayals of movies, but the everyday betrayals of trust, the broken promises, the people who showed you one face and lived another reality. This anger carries hurt underneath it. The pain of having your faith in someone broken. Your willingness to trust taken advantage of. You might recognize the rage that comes with feeling powerless, with being in systems or relationships where your voice doesn't seem to matter, where decisions are made about you without you, where you're expected to accept things that feel fundamentally wrong. This anger is your system's protest against helplessness. Its refusal to accept that you don't matter. Or perhaps you carry the anger of the caregivers, the helpers, the ones who give and give until they're empty, who support everyone else's dreams while their own gather dust. This rage isn't selfish. It's your life force refusing to be completely subsumed into other people's needs, insisting that you, too, are worthy of care and attention and support. What all of these scenarios have in common is this. They're situations where something in you recognizes that a boundary has been crossed, that respect has been withheld, that your inherent worth has been questioned or ignored. Your anger in these moments isn't evidence of your flaws. It's evidence of your intact sense of justice, your healthy need for respect, your appropriate desire to be treated as the valuable human being you are. But here's what often happens. Because many of us learned that anger isn't safe or acceptable, we turn it inward. Instead of recognizing these situations as boundary violations that deserve a response, we ask ourselves what we did wrong. Instead of trusting our emotional radar, we assume we're being too sensitive. Instead of honoring the wisdom in our anger, we shame ourselves for having it at all. This is how protective anger becomes toxic shame. This is how appropriate boundary responses become self-criticism. This is how the very system designed to keep you safe becomes another source of attack, this time from the inside. Let me tell you about the guardian of the sacred grove. Long ago, in a time when the world was younger and the boundaries between the seen and unseen were thinner, there lived a guardian whose sacred duty was to protect a grove of ancient trees. These weren't ordinary trees. They were the memory keepers, each one holding the stories and wisdom of generations. Their roots intertwined so deeply that they shared not just soil and water, but dreams and sorrows, hopes and fears. The guardian had been chosen for this role not because she was the strongest or the fiercest, but because she felt everything so deeply. She could sense disturbances in the grove before they were visible, could feel the tree's distress in her own body, could hear the whispers of harm carried on distant winds. Her sensitivity, which others sometimes saw as a weakness, was actually her greatest strength as a protector. For many years, the guardian lived in harmony with her sacred duty. When storms threatened, she would brace the younger trees. When diseases tried to take hold, she would tend to the affected areas with healing, herbs and gentle care. When lost travelers stumbled into the grove, she would guide them safely through without disturbing the ancient peace. But as time passed, the world around the grove began to change. People came who didn't understand the sacredness of the place, who saw the trees only as resources to be harvested, the land only as space to be claimed. They would enter the grove with loud voices and careless feet, breaking branches, carving initials into bark, leaving behind a litter of their passing. Each time this happened, the guardian felt a fire rise in her chest, a burning, protective rage that made her whole body tremble with the need to act. This wasn't the gentle strength she'd always known. This was something wilder, more primitive, more powerful. It frightened her, this intensity of feeling, this urge to roar and fight and chase away every threat with the full force of her fury. First few times she felt this rage, she tried to suppress it. A true guardian should be peaceful, she told herself. I should be able to protect with gentleness alone. She would swallow the fire, smile at the intruders, politely ask them to be more careful. But they rarely listened to politeness, and the grove continued to suffer small wounds that accumulated over time. The rage grew stronger with each incident. Sometimes the guardian would lie awake at night, her body still buzzing with unexpressed energy, replaying all the moments when she should have spoken more firmly, acted more decisively. The anger began to feel like a beast living inside her chest, something dangerous and uncontrollable that she had to keep caged at all costs. But the memory keeper trees, in their ancient wisdom, began to whisper to her in her dreams. Child, they said, their voices like wind through leaves. The fire you fear is not your enemy. It is the same energy that causes a mother bear to protect her cubs. The same force that drives a river to carve through stone when its natural path is blocked. Your rage is not a flaw in your character. It is love in its most protective form. But it feels so overwhelming, the guardian whispered back. So destructive. What if I hurt someone? What if the fire consumes everything I'm trying to protect? The oldest memory keeper, whose trunk was so wide that 20 people couldn't wrap their arms around it, spoke with the patience of centuries. Fire can destroy, yes. But fire also clears the undergrowth so new growth can emerge. Fire creates the space that allows the forest to regenerate. Your anger is information, child. It tells you when the sacred is being threatened. The question isn't whether to feel it, but how to work with it wisely. The guardian began to understand that her rage wasn't separate from her love. It was love's fierce twin, the energy that arose when what she cared about was threatened. She started to listen to the anger instead of fighting it, to feel its intelligence. Instead of fearing its power, the next time intruders came to the grove, something was different. The guardian still felt the fire rise in her chest, but instead of suppressing it, she breathed with it. Instead of apologizing for her intensity, she let it inform her voice. This is a sacred place, she said, her words carrying the full weight of her caring. These trees are ancient and irreplaceable. I need you to leave. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried something that hadn't been there before, the unmistakable energy of someone who knew her own worth and the worth of what she protected. The intruders, sensing this change, actually listened. They left without arguments, some even offering quiet apologies. Over time, the guardian learned to work with her protective fire as an ally rather than an enemy. She discovered that when she honored the anger instead of hiding from it, she could channel its energy into clear communication, firm boundaries, and decisive action. The rage that had once felt so frightening became her strength, her clarity, her unwavering commitment to what mattered most. The grove began to heal. Word spread that the sacred grove had a protector who was both loving and fierce, someone who welcomed visitors who came with respect, but who wouldn't tolerate harm to the ancient trees. The guardian found that she rarely had to raise her voice now. There was something in her presence that communicated her dedication without aggression, her strength without cruelty. But perhaps most importantly, the guardian discovered that when she stopped fighting her own protective instincts, she had more energy for everything else. The love that had always driven her service could now flow more freely because it wasn't being blocked by the dam of suppressed anger. she could tend the grove with greater skill, welcome respectful visitors with greater warmth, and rest more peacefully knowing that she had the full range of her protective capacities available when needed. The memory. Keep her trees, whispered there. Approval. Now you understand, they said. The fire was never the problem. Fighting the fire was the problem. Your rage and your love grow from the same root. Your deep knowing that some things are too precious to be harmed without response. And late at night, when the grove was peaceful and the stars reflected in the clear stream that ran through the ancient trees, the guardian would place her hand on her chest and feel the quiet presence of the fire that lived there, not as something to be feared, but as something to be grateful for. It was her early warning system, her call to action, a reminder that she cared deeply enough about something to protect it with everything she had. Just like you, listening to this now, carry your own sacred grove, your values, your loved ones, your sense of justice, your own precious heart. And just like the guardian, the rage you feel when these sacred things are threatened isn't evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that something is very right with you, that you know what matters, that you care deeply, that some part of you has never stopped believing that the sacred deserves protection. As we settle deeper into this exploration, let's gently examine the beliefs that may be driving your relationship with anger. These aren't conscious thoughts you've chosen to believe. They're more like invisible operating systems, running in the background of your emotional life, shaping your responses before you're even aware of them. The first belief we'll explore is perhaps the most fundamental. If I show my anger, I'll be abandoned. This belief often feels less like a thought and more like a truth written into your bones, something you know without having to think about it. It shows up as that automatic swallowing of words when you're upset, that immediate shift into caretaking mode when conflict arises, that instant apology when you've expressed even mild frustration. This belief doesn't develop in a vacuum. It grows from real experiences, often from very early in life, when your survival actually did depend on maintaining connection with your caregivers. Maybe you grew up in a household where anger was dangerous, where someone else's rage dominated the emotional landscape, where there was no space for your smaller feelings amid the chaos of adult dysfunction. Or perhaps you learned this lesson more subtly. Maybe you had caregivers who were emotionally fragile, who couldn't handle conflict or strong emotions, who would withdraw their love or attention when you expressed any displeasure. You might have learned that your anger hurt the people you loved most, that it was safer to swallow your feelings than to risk losing the connection you desperately needed. Some of you might have grown up in families where conflict was handled through silent treatments, where expressing anger meant being shut out, ignored, treated as if you didn't exist until you learned to smile again. The message was clear. Angry children don't get love. Angry children get abandoned. For others, this belief formed in relationship dynamics later in life. Maybe you learned that partners would threaten to leave when you expressed frustration, that friends would distance themselves when you showed anything other than pleasant agreement, that your anger was consistently met with punishment in the form of withdrawal, criticism, or abandonment. This belief creates a particular kind of emotional prison. When you believe that your anger will drive people away, you learn to monitor yourself constantly, to gauge the emotional temperature of every room you enter, to modulate your authentic responses to keep others comfortable. You become an expert at reading the subtle signs of someone else's discomfort with your feelings, and you adjust accordingly, often without conscious thought. The cruel irony is that this belief, designed to keep you connected, often creates the very distance it seeks to prevent. When you consistently suppress your authentic feelings to maintain relationships, you end up feeling unseen, unheard, and ultimately alone, even when surrounded by people. The connections you're trying so hard to preserve become hollow because They're based on a version of you that isn't fully real. This belief also creates a secondary layer of anger at yourself for having anger. You might find yourself furious at your own emotional responses, ashamed of your own needs, critical of your own reactions. This creates an internal war that's exhausting and ultimately counterproductive, because you're using anger to fight anger, creating more of the very thing you're trying to eliminate. But here's what I want you to understand. This belief made perfect sense when it formed. Your emotional system developed this strategy to keep you safe, to maintain the connections that felt essential to your survival. There was wisdom in learning to read the room, to prioritize others' comfort, to find ways to get your needs met without triggering conflict. The problem isn't that you developed this belief. It's that your emotional system hasn't updated its risk assessment. The same strategy that kept you safe in one context might be limiting you in another. The caregivers who couldn't handle your anger when you were 5 might be different from the partner who actually wants to know how you really feel. The friends who would abandon you for expressing frustration might not be the same as the people in your life now who are capable of handling the fullness of who you are. This belief often shows up in your body as a particular kind of tension. A tightness in your throat when you want to speak up, a sinking feeling in your stomach when conflict arises, a shallow breathing pattern that develops when you're suppressing strong emotions. Your nervous system learned to prepare for abandonment the moment anger surfaces, even in situations where abandonment isn't actually a threat. The healing here isn't about forcing yourself to express anger in ways that feel unsafe. It's about slowly, gently updating your emotional system's threat assessment. It's about learning to distinguish between past danger and present safety, between relationships that truly couldn't handle your authentic feelings and ones that actually might welcome your honesty. This process requires tremendous patience with yourself. You're not trying to override years of conditioning overnight. You're trying to create new neural pathways while honoring the protective function of the old ones. You're learning to expand your emotional vocabulary beyond the binary of suppress everything or explode everywhere. Sometimes this belief reveals itself in the stories you tell yourself about your anger. I'm too intense, you might think. I care too much. I'm too sensitive. I'm too much. These stories aren't facts about your character. They're echoes of this deeper belief that your authentic emotional responses are somehow dangerous to your connections with others. The truth is that people who truly love you don't need you to be emotionally dishonest to maintain their comfort. People who are capable of real intimacy can handle your anger, especially when it's expressed with care for the relationship. People who abandon you for having feelings weren't offering you real connection in the first place. This doesn't mean you should test every relationship by expressing anger carelessly. It means you can begin to trust that authentic emotion, expressed with skill and care, actually deepens connection rather than threatening it. It means you can start to believe that people who truly see you and value you won't require you to be less than fully human to earn their love. As you rest here tonight, breathing with this recognition, notice if you can feel this belief operating in your body. Notice the places where you hold tension, where you brace against the possibility of abandonment, and see if you can send some gentle compassion to those places, appreciating how hard they've worked to keep you connected, even as you begin to imagine the possibility of connection that doesn't require you to hide your authentic feelings. The second belief that often underlies a complicated relationship with anger is this: my anger is too much and will hurt others. This belief transforms your natural protective response into a weapon you're afraid to wield, turning your emotional intensity into a source of shame rather than strength. This belief often develops from experiences where your anger did seem to cause harm, where your emotional intensity overwhelmed someone else's capacity to respond, where your protective instincts were met with fear or withdrawal rather than understanding. Maybe you were a child whose anger was bigger than your small body could contain, whose emotional responses seemed to frighten the adults around you. Maybe you grew up in a household where you witnessed anger being used as a weapon, where rage was associated with control, manipulation, or emotional violence. For many people, this belief is deeply intertwined with messages about their identity. If you're someone who's been marginalized, you might have learned that your anger was particularly dangerous, that it confirmed negative stereotypes about your race, your gender, your background. You might have been told that your anger was aggressive, when others' anger was passionate, that your intensity was too much when others' intensity was charismatic. Women, in particular, often carry this belief because they've been taught that female anger is uniquely destructive, that it's ugly or unfeminine or crazy. The same emotional intensity that might be celebrated in a man becomes evidence of instability in a woman. This creates a double bind where you're expected to care deeply about everything, but express that caring in ways that never make anyone uncomfortable. People who grew up in households with addiction, mental illness, or trauma often carry this belief because they witnessed anger being expressed in ways that truly were harmful. You might have seen how rage could be used to control, to intimidate, to create fear. You might have been on the receiving end of someone else's unprocessed anger, and you swore you would never make anyone feel the way you felt in those moments. This belief creates a particular kind of hypervigilance around your own emotional responses. You learn to monitor not just what you feel, but how your feelings affect others. You become an expert at reading the subtle signs of someone else's discomfort with your intensity, and you adjust accordingly, often diminishing yourself to maintain others' comfort. The cruel paradox is that when you believe your anger will hurt others, you often end up hurting yourself instead. You turn the intensity inward, where it becomes self-criticism, perfectionism, or depression. You channel the energy that was meant to protect you into attacking yourself, creating an internal war that's exhausting and ultimately counterproductive. This belief also creates what psychologists call emotional dysregulation, because you're so afraid of your anger's impact on others, you never learn to work with it skillfully. Instead of developing the capacity to feel anger without being overwhelmed by it, you swing between suppression and explosion. You hold it in until you can't anymore. Then you express it in ways that actually might be harmful, which reinforces your belief that your anger is dangerous. But here's what's crucial to understand. The capacity for intense emotion isn't the same as the capacity for harm. Fire can destroy, yes, but fire also provides warmth, light, and the energy needed for transformation. The same intensity that you fear might hurt others is also the source of your passion, your creativity, your ability to care deeply about justice and fairness and truth. Your anger becomes harmful, not because of its intensity, but because of how it's expressed, and more importantly, how it's been suppressed. When you don't have healthy ways to work with your anger, when you've never learned to channel its energy constructively, when you've been taught to fear it rather than understand it, then yes, it can become destructive. But the solution isn't to eliminate the anger. It's to develop a more skillful relationship with it. This belief often shows up in your body as a particular kind of holding pattern. You might notice that you literally hold your breath when you feel angry, that you tense your jaw or clench your fists as if you're physically restraining something dangerous. Your nervous system learned to contain your emotional responses to protect others. But this containment often creates more pressure, not less. The healing here involves learning to distinguish between emotional intensity and emotional harm. It involves understanding that you can feel anger fully without expressing it destructively, that you can honor your emotional responses without overwhelming others with them. It involves developing what trauma therapist Resmaa Menakem calls emotional granularity, the ability to feel and express the full spectrum of your emotions with skill and care. This doesn't mean you should express anger carelessly or without consideration for its impact. It means you can learn to trust that your emotional intensity, when channeled skillfully, is actually a gift rather than a burden. It means you can begin to see your capacity for deep feeling as evidence of your humanity rather than evidence of your danger. Many people with this belief have never learned healthy models of anger expression. They've seen anger used as a weapon, but they've never seen it used as information, as boundary setting, as a force for positive change. They've witnessed rage, but they've never witnessed the kind of fierce love that protects without destroying, that stands up for what matters without tearing others down. Part of healing this belief involves finding new models, new examples of people who can be intensely passionate without being harmful, who can feel deeply without overwhelming others, who can express anger in ways that actually strengthen relationships rather than damaging them. This might mean seeking out mentors, therapists, or communities where emotional intensity is welcomed and channeled constructively. It also involves developing what you might call emotional titration, the ability to feel your anger in manageable doses, to express it in ways that can be received, to share your intensity in portions that others can handle. This isn't about diminishing yourself. It's about learning to share your full self in ways that create connection rather than disconnection. The truth is that people who truly love you aren't afraid of your emotional intensity when it's expressed with care and skill. People who are capable of real intimacy can handle your anger, especially when it comes from a place of caring rather than a place of control. People who consistently can't handle your authentic emotional responses might not be offering you the kind of relationship that can truly nourish you. As you continue to rest here, breathing with this recognition, notice if you can feel this belief operating in your body. Notice the places where you hold back, where you contain your intensity to protect others, and see if you can send some gentle appreciation to those places, honoring how hard they've worked to keep you connected, even as you begin to imagine the possibility of sharing your full emotional self with people who can truly receive it. The deepest and perhaps most insidious belief that many people carry about their anger is this: I don't have the right to be angry. This belief operates at a level even more fundamental than the fear of abandonment or the fear of causing harm. It questions your very right to have emotional responses, your legitimacy as someone whose feelings matter, your worthiness to take up emotional space in the world. This belief often develops from experiences where your anger was consistently invalidated, where you were told that your emotional responses were inappropriate, unwarranted, or simply wrong. Maybe you grew up in a family where your feelings were regularly dismissed with phrases like, you have no right to be upset, or have nothing to complain about, or other people have it worse than you do. For many people, this belief is deeply connected to their position in family systems or social hierarchies. If you were the youngest child, you might have learned that your anger was less legitimate than your older siblings. If you were financially dependent on others, you might have learned that your anger was ungrateful or inappropriate. If you held less power in your family, workplace, or social circles, you might have learned that your emotional responses were presumptuous or out of line. This belief is particularly common among people who've been taught that their role is to serve others, to prioritize others' needs, to be grateful for whatever they receive. Caregivers, helpers, and people-pleasers often carry this belief because they've been taught that their value lies in their ability to support others, not in their capacity to have their own needs and feelings. People from marginalized communities often carry this belief because they've been told, explicitly or implicitly, that their anger is inappropriate, that they should be grateful for whatever treatment they receive, that their emotional responses to injustice are evidence of their inability to handle reality rather than evidence of their intact sense of justice. The belief "I don't have the right to be angry," creates a particular kind of emotional paralysis. When you believe that your anger is fundamentally illegitimate, you can't use it as information. You can't trust it to tell you when boundaries have been crossed, when you're being treated unfairly, when something important to you is being threatened. Instead, you second-guess every emotional response, wondering if you're overreacting, being too sensitive, making problems where none exist. This belief also creates what psychologists call learned helplessness, the sense that you have no agency in your own emotional life, that you're required to accept whatever treatment you receive without response. When you believe you don't have the right to be angry, you also believe you don't have the right to advocate for yourself, to set boundaries, to expect better treatment. The cruel irony is that this belief often develops from experiences where expressing anger would have been dangerous or counterproductive. Maybe you learned that your anger would be met with punishment, that it would make bad situations worse, that it was safer to swallow your feelings than to risk the consequences of expressing them. In those situations, suppressing your anger was actually adaptive, protective, wise. But what happens over time is that your emotional system generalizes this lesson. What was once a specific adaptation to a specific danger becomes a global belief about your rights as a human being. The strategy that kept you safe in one context begins to limit you in all contexts, preventing you from accessing one of your most important sources of information about your own well-being. This belief often shows up as a particular kind of internal dialogue. When you feel angry, you might immediately start arguing with yourself. "I shouldn't feel this way. I don't have any reason to be upset. Other people have it worse. I'm being dramatic. I'm being selfish. I'm being unreasonable." You become your own harshest critic, invalidating your own emotional responses before anyone else has the chance to. The healing here involves recognizing that emotional responses aren't subject to logic or fairness in the way we typically understand those concepts. You don't have to justify your feelings to anyone, including yourself. You don't have to prove that your anger is reasonable or proportionate or appropriate. You have the right to feel what you feel simply because you're a human being with a functioning nervous system. This doesn't mean that all expressions of anger are healthy or helpful. It means that the feeling itself, that surge of energy, that sense of "this isn't right," is always valid information about your internal state. It's your emotional system's way of telling you that something needs attention, that some boundary has been crossed, that some need isn't being met. Part of healing this belief involves developing what trauma therapist Pete Walker calls emotional flashback awareness, recognizing when your current responses are being shaped by past experiences of invalidation. When you catch yourself thinking, "I don't have the right to feel this way," you can pause and ask, whose voice is that? Where did I learn that my feelings don't matter? What would it be like to trust my emotional responses instead of arguing with them? This healing process also involves developing a different relationship with the concept of rights altogether. Instead of thinking about whether you have the right to be angry, you can begin to think about anger as information that deserves attention regardless of whether it's justified by external standards. Instead of asking, "Do I have the right to feel this way?" you can ask, "What is this feeling trying to tell me? What need is it pointing toward? What boundary is it trying to establish?" Many people with this belief have internalized the idea that their emotional responses are burdens. To others, that their feelings are problems to be solved rather than information to be honored. They've learned to apologize for their own emotional experiences, to minimize their own responses, to treat their own feelings as inconveniences. The truth is that your emotional responses are part of your essential humanity. They're part of how you navigate the world, how you maintain your well-being, how you know what's working and what isn't in your life. When you consistently invalidate your own feelings, you lose access to crucial information about your own experience. This belief often carries intergenerational patterns. You might have learned that your feelings don't matter because the people who raised you never learned that their feelings mattered. You might be carrying the emotional suppression patterns of parents or grandparents who also believed they didn't have the right to their own responses. The healing involves not just changing your relationship with your own anger, but also developing compassion for the people who taught you to suppress your feelings. They were likely doing the best they could with their own inherited patterns of emotional suppression. They were probably trying to protect you from dangers they had experienced, even if their protection created different kinds of limitations. As you rest here tonight, breathing with this deep recognition, notice if you can feel this belief operating in your system. Notice the places where you automatically dismiss your own feelings, where you argue with your own emotional responses, and see if you can offer some gentle rebellion to those places. The quiet, revolutionary act of believing that your feelings matter simply because they're yours, that your emotional responses are valid simply because you're having them, that you have the right to feel what you feel simply because you're human. Now that we've explored the beliefs that may be shaping your relationship with anger, we can begin the gentle work of healing. This process doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds in phases, each one building on the last, each one honoring your system's need to move at its own pace. The first phase is recognition, the practice of becoming aware of your anger patterns without immediately trying to change them. This might sound simple, but for many people who've spent years suppressing or fighting their anger, simply noticing it can feel revolutionary. Recognition begins with developing what mindfulness teachers call witness consciousness, the ability to observe your internal experience without being overwhelmed by it. When anger arises, instead of immediately suppressing it or acting on it, you create a small space of awareness around it. You notice, oh, there's anger here. There's that familiar heat in my chest, that tension in my jaw, that urge to either fight or disappear. This kind of noticing requires tremendous gentleness with yourself. You're not trying to analyze why you're angry or determine whether it's justified. You're not trying to make it go away or make it bigger. You're simply practicing the radical act of acknowledging what's true in your body and emotions in this moment. For many people, the recognition phase reveals how much anger they've been carrying without realizing it. You might notice that what you've been calling anxiety is actually suppressed anger. You might discover that your chronic fatigue is connected to the exhausting work of holding down your rage. You might realize that your perfectionism or people-pleasing patterns are ways of managing the anger that arises when you feel unseen or unappreciated. This phase often involves learning to distinguish between different types of anger. There's the sharp, protective anger that arises when boundaries are crossed. There's the slow-burning anger of accumulated resentments. There's the grief-tinged anger that comes with disappointment. There's the energizing anger that mobilizes you to fight for what matters. Each type carries different information and calls for different responses. The recognition phase also involves noticing the stories you tell yourself about your anger. Do you immediately label it as bad or wrong? Do you try to talk yourself out of it? Do you shame yourself for having it? Do you escalate it into rage? Do you turn it into blame or criticism of others? These patterns aren't failures. They're protective strategies your system developed. But recognizing them is the first step toward developing new options. Pay attention to your body during this phase. Anger has a distinct physiological signature: increased heart rate, muscle tension, changes in breathing, heat in the chest or face. Learning to recognize these bodily signals helps you catch anger earlier, before it builds to overwhelming levels or gets suppressed into numbness. Notice also the triggers that tend to activate your anger. Is it feeling unheard? Being interrupted? Witnessing injustice? Being criticized? Having your time disrespected? There's no wrong answer here. Your triggers make sense given your history and values. The goal isn't to eliminate triggers, but to understand them as sources of information about what matters to you. The recognition phase requires patience because your nervous system has been operating on autopilot for a long time. You might notice anger only after it's already been suppressed, or only after it's already been expressed in ways you didn't intend. This is normal. You're rewiring patterns that have been in place for years or decades. Be especially gentle with yourself when you notice anger arising in situations where you've been taught it's inappropriate. At work, in intimate relationships, in situations where you're supposed to be grateful or supportive. These moments are opportunities to practice the radical act of trusting your emotional responses even when they don't fit others' expectations. Remember that recognition isn't the same as action. You can notice anger without immediately expressing it. You can acknowledge it without letting it control your behavior. You can feel it fully without overwhelm. This distinction is crucial because it allows you to honor your emotional truth while also choosing how to respond skillfully. The recognition phase is also about developing what trauma therapist Janina Fisher calls dual awareness, the ability to feel your emotions while also maintaining a sense of your present safety. You can notice anger about something that happened in the past while also recognizing that you're safe in this moment. You can feel angry about an injustice while also appreciating the people and circumstances that are supporting you now. As you practice recognition, you might be surprised by how much more space you have around your emotional experiences. When you're not fighting your anger or being overwhelmed by it, you can actually learn from it. You can let it inform your understanding of your needs, your boundaries, your values. You can let it guide you toward what needs attention in your life. This phase is complete not when your anger disappears, but when you can consistently notice it with curiosity rather than judgment, when you can feel it without being afraid of it, when you can trust it as information, even when that information is uncomfortable. The second phase of healing involves what we might call compassion meeting, the practice of approaching your anger with the same gentleness you would offer a frightened child or a wounded animal. This phase recognizes that your anger has been trying to protect you, often for a very long time, and it deserves appreciation rather than criticism. Compassion meeting begins with understanding that your anger isn't your enemy. It's a part of your protective system that has been working overtime to keep you safe. Even when anger feels destructive or overwhelming, it's arising from a place of caring. Anger says, "This matters to me. This person or value or boundary is important enough to fight for." At its core, anger is love in its most protective form. In this phase, you begin to develop what internal family systems therapy calls a self-led relationship with your anger. Instead of being overwhelmed by it or fighting against it, you approach it from your wise, compassionate self, the part of you that can hold all of your different emotions with understanding and care. One way to practice compassion meeting is through internal dialogue. When you notice anger arising, you might speak to it the way you would speak to a friend who's been protecting you. "Thank you for caring so much about what's right. Thank you for trying to keep me safe. Thank you for refusing to let me be treated badly. I see how hard you've been working." This isn't about eliminating the anger. It's about changing your relationship with it. Many people are surprised by what happens when they meet their anger with appreciation instead of resistance. Often, the anger softens not because it's being suppressed, but because it's finally being seen and valued. When anger feels heard and appreciated, it doesn't have to work so hard to get your attention. The compassion meeting phase also involves understanding the historical context of your anger. Your protective responses develop for good reasons, usually during times when you truly were vulnerable and needed extra protection. The anger that feels too much now might have been exactly the right amount when you were younger, smaller, more dependent on others for your safety. This phase often brings up grief. Grief for the younger self who had to develop such strong, protective responses. Grief for the situations that required such vigilance. Grief for the relationships where your anger wasn't safe or welcome. This grief isn't a problem to be solved. It's a natural response to recognizing how much you've had to protect yourself, how much you've had to carry alone. Part of compassion meeting involves developing what trauma therapist Resmaa Menakem calls somatic abolitionism, the practice of liberating your body from the inherited patterns of protection that may no longer serve you. This doesn't mean eliminating your protective responses, but rather expanding your repertoire so you have more choices about how to respond to different situations. You might practice speaking directly to the part of you that carries anger. I understand why you learned to be so vigilant. I appreciate how you've protected our values and our boundaries. I'm wondering if we might explore some new ways to stay safe while also allowing for more connection and joy. This kind of internal dialogue honors the wisdom of your protective patterns while also creating space for growth. The compassion meeting phase often involves recognizing that your anger carries important information about your values. The things that make you angry reveal what matters most to you: justice, respect, safety, authenticity, love. Your anger is a guardian of these values, and it deserves appreciation for its dedication to what you hold sacred. This phase also involves developing discernment about when anger is arising from past wounds versus present circumstances. Sometimes, your anger is a proportionate response to what's happening now. Sometimes it's carrying the weight of accumulated injuries from the past. Both are valid, but they call for different responses. Learning to distinguish between them helps you respond more skillfully. You might notice during this phase that your anger has been carrying not just your own wounds, but the wounds of your family system, your community, your ancestors. This isn't about taking on responsibility for healing everyone's pain, but about understanding that your protective responses may be connected to larger patterns of hurt and healing. Compassion meeting also involves recognizing the cost of suppressing anger. When you consistently deny or minimize your angry responses, you often end up feeling disconnected from your own power, your own voice, your own ability to advocate for yourself and others. The anger that seems so problematic is actually connected to your life force, your passion, your commitment to what matters. This phase often brings relief as you stop fighting against a part of yourself that's been trying to help. Many people discover that when they meet their anger with compassion instead of criticism, they have more energy for everything else. The war between different parts of themselves can begin to end, creating space for integration and wholeness. You might practice compassion meeting through imagery, visualizing your anger as a protective figure, perhaps a fierce guardian or a loyal warrior, and offering it gratitude for its service. Or you might practice it through movement, allowing your body to express appreciation for its protective responses through gentle stretching, dancing, or other forms of embodied gratitude. The compassion meeting phase is about developing what Buddhist teacher Tara Brach calls radical acceptance, the willingness to embrace all parts of your emotional experience with unconditional love. This doesn't mean you approve of every expression of anger, but that you appreciate the underlying caring that gives rise to it. This phase often shifts something fundamental in your nervous system, when anger no longer has to fight for recognition and appreciation. It can begin to function more like the early warning system it was designed to be. Instead of overwhelming you or being suppressed, it can inform you about what needs attention in your life. As you practice compassion meeting, you might notice that other emotions become more accessible too. When you're not using so much energy to fight against your anger, you might find more space for joy, creativity, love, and peace. The goal isn't to eliminate anger, but to integrate it as one valuable part of your full emotional spectrum. The third phase of healing involves the beginning of integration, the process of incorporating your new understanding of anger into your daily life in sustainable, skillful ways. This isn't about dramatic transformation overnight, but about small, consistent practices that honor both your protective needs and your growth edges. Integration begins with very gentle experiments in honoring your anger without being overwhelmed by it. This might mean taking 3 deep breaths when you notice anger arising instead of immediately suppressing it. It might mean saying, "I need" a moment to think about this instead of automatically agreeing to things that don't feel right. It might mean writing in a journal about your angry feelings instead of keeping them locked inside your body. The key to sustainable integration is starting with the smallest possible steps. Your nervous system has been operating in certain patterns for a long time, and it needs to be convinced gradually that new responses are safe. If you try to change too much too quickly, your system may revert to old patterns as a protective measure. One gentle way to begin integration is through what trauma therapist Peter Levine calls titration. Experiencing anger in small, manageable doses rather than being flooded by it all at once. When you notice anger arising, you might focus on just one sensation, the warmth in your chest, the tension in your shoulders, rather than the full emotional experience. This helps your nervous system build tolerance for anger without being overwhelmed. Integration also involves developing what you might call anger literacy. Learning to distinguish between different intensities and types of anger, and developing appropriate responses for each. A minor annoyance might call for a simple internal acknowledgement. "I notice I'm irritated that the meeting ran over." A more significant boundary violation might call for a conversation. "When you interrupted me, I felt disrespected, and I need you to find a better way to communicate." This phase often involves learning to express anger proactively rather than reactively. Instead of waiting until you're overwhelmed to address something that's bothering you, you begin to speak up when issues are still small and manageable. This might sound like, "I'm starting to feel frustrated about this situation, and I'd like to talk about it before it becomes a bigger problem." Integration requires developing what trauma therapist Judith Herman calls empowerment. The sense that you have agency in your own life, that your responses matter, that you can influence your circumstances. For many people who've learned to suppress anger, this sense of empowerment has been damaged. The process of learning to honor your anger helps restore your sense of personal power. This phase often involves practicing new ways of thinking about conflict. Instead of seeing anger or disagreement as threats to relationships, you begin to see them as opportunities for deeper understanding and stronger connections. You learn that relationships that can't handle your authentic emotions aren't actually offering you real intimacy. The integration phase also involves developing what might be called somatic sovereignty, the ability to trust your body's responses and to make decisions based on your internal wisdom rather than external expectations. This means paying attention to the sensations that arise when you're making decisions, noticing when something feels right in your body versus when it creates tension or constriction. You might begin to practice what trauma therapist Risma Medicum calls clean pain versus dirty pain. Clean pain is the appropriate anger that arises when boundaries are crossed or values are violated. Dirty pain is the additional suffering that comes from fighting against your anger, shaming yourself for having it, or expressing it in ways that create more harm. Integration involves learning to feel clean pain without adding dirty pain on top of it. This phase often involves setting very small, achievable boundaries as practice. Instead of trying to revolutionize all your relationships at once, you might practice saying no to one small request per week or speaking up about one minor preference per day. These small practices help build your tolerance for the discomfort that often comes with change. Integration also involves developing what you might call repair skills, the ability to address situations when you've expressed anger in ways that weren't skillful. This isn't about apologizing for having feelings, but about taking responsibility for your impact while still honoring your underlying needs. It might sound like, I raised my voice earlier, and I want to apologize for that. I'm still concerned about the issue we were discussing, and I'd like to find a calmer way to talk about it. The beginning integration phase often involves a lot of internal dialogue as you navigate situations that used to be automatic. You might find yourself thinking, I notice I'm getting angry about this. What is the anger trying to tell me? What boundary is being crossed? How do I want to respond? This internal check-in process helps. You respond from choice rather than habit. This phase also involves developing what trauma therapist Pat Ogden calls dual awareness, the ability to stay connected to your present moment's safety while also honoring your emotional responses. You can feel angry about something while also recognizing that you're physically safe, that you have choices, that you're not trapped in the way you might have been in the past. Integration requires patience with the nonlinear nature of healing. You might have days when you handle anger skillfully and days when you revert to old patterns. This isn't failure. It's the natural process of developing new neural pathways. Each time you notice an old pattern and choose differently, you're strengthening your capacity for new responses. The integration phase often involves developing what might be called emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between different types of anger and respond accordingly. Righteous anger about injustice might call for advocacy or action. Personal anger about boundary violations might call for conversation or limit setting. Historical anger about past wounds might call for therapy or other healing work. As you begin this integration process, remember that the goal isn't to become someone who never feels anger, but to become someone who can feel anger without being overwhelmed by it, who can use anger as information without being controlled by it, who can express anger in ways that honor both your needs and your relationships. This phase is about developing what trauma therapist Bessel van der Kolk calls agency, the sense that you can influence your own experience, that you have choices about how to respond to life's challenges, that you're not at the mercy of your automatic reactions. Your anger, when integrated skillfully, becomes one of your tools for creating the life you want rather than something that controls you. As we move deeper into the integration of your new relationship with anger, it's essential to understand that this healing happens not just in your mind, but in your body. Your nervous system holds the memory of every time anger wasn't safe, every time you had to suppress your protective responses, every time your emotional truth was met with danger or rejection. True healing requires working with your body's wisdom as well as your mental understanding. The body-based approach to healing anger recognizes that emotions aren't just thoughts or feelings. They're full-body experiences that involve your nervous system, your muscles, your breathing, your heart rate, your hormones. When you've spent years suppressing anger, your body has developed specific holding patterns to contain that energy. These patterns might show up as chronic tension in your jaw, shoulders, or stomach. They might manifest as shallow breathing, clenched fists, or a tendency to hold your breath when conflict arises. Somatic healing begins with developing what trauma therapist Peter Levine calls felt sense, the ability to notice subtle sensations in your body and understand them as sources of information. When anger arises, instead of immediately moving to thoughts about whether it's justified or what you should do about it, you first tune into the physical experience. Where do you feel the anger in your body? Is it hot or cold? Tight or expansive? Moving or still? This kind of somatic awareness helps you catch anger earlier. before it builds to overwhelming levels or gets pushed down into numbness. You might notice the earliest signs: a slight quickening of your pulse, a subtle tightening in your chest, a barely perceptible shift in your breathing. These early signals are opportunities to work with anger skillfully rather than being overwhelmed by it. One of the most important aspects of body-based healing is learning to breathe with your anger rather than holding your breath against it. Many people unconsciously restrict their breathing when they feel angry, as if they're trying to contain the energy by cutting off its oxygen supply. But this actually intensifies the anger and makes it more likely to be expressed explosively or suppressed completely. Instead, you can practice what trauma therapist Resma Menakem calls clean breathing, allowing your breath to flow naturally, even when you're feeling intense emotions. When you notice anger arising, you might take 3 slow, deep breaths, imagining that you're breathing space around the anger rather than trying to breathe it away. This helps your nervous system stay regulated while still honoring your emotional experience. Body-based healing also involves learning to discharge the energy of anger in healthy ways. Anger mobilizes your body for action. It increases your heart rate, tenses your muscles, and floods your system with stress hormones. If this energy doesn't have an outlet, it can get stuck in your body, creating chronic tension, fatigue, or other physical symptoms. You might experiment with gentle physical expressions of anger, pushing against the wall, hitting a pillow, stamping your feet, or doing vigorous exercise. The key is finding ways to move the energy through your system without harming yourself or others. This isn't about becoming more aggressive. It's about honoring your body's natural responses and giving anger's energy a healthy outlet. Another crucial aspect of somatic healing is learning to expand your nervous system's capacity to handle intensity. Trauma therapist Sonia Luger talks about developing distress tolerance, the ability to feel strong emotions without being overwhelmed by them. This happens gradually, through repeated experiences of feeling anger while remaining grounded and safe. You can practice this by working with anger in titrated doses, feeling just a little bit of anger at a time, staying present with the sensation until it naturally shifts or dissipates, then gradually building your tolerance for more intensity. This is like building physical strength. You start with light weights and gradually increase the load as your capacity grows. The body-based approach also involves understanding anger as what trauma therapist Stephen Porges calls a mobilization response, part of your autonomic nervous system survival strategies. When you feel threatened, your system mobilizes energy to fight or flee. When you've learned that fighting or fleeing aren't safe options, this energy can get trapped in your body, creating what feels like chronic anger or rage. Healing involves completing these incomplete mobilization responses. This might mean literally practicing the movements your body wanted to make but couldn't, reaching out to push something away, curling up to protect yourself, or running in place to discharge fight or flight energy. These movements aren't about acting out anger dramatically. They're about helping your nervous system complete natural processes that were interrupted. Body-based healing also recognizes that anger often carries wisdom about boundaries. Your body knows when someone has moved too close, when your personal space has been invaded, when your energy is being drained. Learning to trust these somatic signals helps you maintain healthier boundaries before situations become overwhelming. You might practice what trauma therapist Kathy Kane calls boundary sensing, noticing how different people and situations feel in your body. Some people might create a sense of expansion and ease in your system. Others might create contraction, tension, or the urge to move away. This information isn't judgment about these people. It's data about what your nervous system needs to feel safe and regulated. The somatic approach to anger healing also involves developing what trauma therapist Pat Ogden calls body awareness. the ability to track the constantly changing landscape of sensations in your body. As you practice this awareness, you begin to notice the early warning signs of overwhelm, the subtle cues that indicate you need rest or space, the physical sensations that accompany different emotions. This body awareness helps you develop what might be called emotional regulation from the ground up, managing your emotional responses not through willpower or cognitive strategies alone, but through working with your nervous system's natural capacity for self-regulation. When you understand how your body responds to different situations, you can make choices that support your nervous system's equilibrium. Body-based healing often involves working with what trauma therapist Resmaa Menakem calls historical trauma. The ways that your body may be carrying not just your own experiences, but the unresolved trauma of your family and community. This isn't about taking on responsibility for healing everyone's pain, but about understanding that your protective responses may be connected to larger patterns of survival and resilience. The somatic integration of anger healing also involves developing what you might call embodied compassion, the ability to offer your body the same gentleness you're learning to offer your emotions. This means honoring your body's need for rest when you're processing intense feelings, nourishing yourself well during times of emotional growth, and treating your physical form as a wise ally in your healing journey rather than something to be controlled or ignored. As you continue to develop this body-based relationship with anger, remember that your nervous system has its own timeline for healing. Some days you might feel very regulated and capable of handling intensity. Other days you might feel more sensitive and need extra gentleness. Both experiences are valid and necessary parts of the integration process. As you develop a healthier relationship with your anger, you'll likely notice significant shifts in your relationships with others. This can be both exciting and challenging. Exciting because you're becoming more authentic and empowered. Challenging because not everyone in your life may be comfortable with these changes. Understanding these relationship dynamics is crucial for maintaining your growth while navigating the inevitable adjustments that come with transformation. One of the first things you might notice is that your tolerance for certain behaviors decreases. Things that you used to accept because you were suppressing your anger may no longer feel tolerable. This isn't because you're becoming more difficult or demanding. It's because you're no longer willing to sacrifice your well-being to maintain false peace. Your anger is functioning as it should, as an early warning system that alerts you when your boundaries are being crossed. This shift often reveals the difference between genuine harmony and what trauma therapist Resmaa Menakem calls artificial calm, the false peace that exists when one person consistently suppresses their needs to avoid conflict. As you begin honoring your anger, some relationships may experience temporary turbulence as they adjust to your increased authenticity. This turbulence isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's often a sign that something is finally becoming right. Some people in your life may initially resist your changes. If they've become accustomed to you being consistently accommodating, always available, never challenging, they may feel confused or even threatened by your new boundaries. This resistance doesn't necessarily mean they don't care about you. It may simply mean they're struggling to adjust to a new dynamic. People often unconsciously resist change, even positive change, because it requires them to examine their own patterns. It's important to understand that some relationships in your life may have been unconsciously based on your willingness to suppress your authentic responses. These relationships aren't necessarily malicious, but they may have developed around an imbalanced dynamic where your emotional needs were consistently secondary to maintaining peace or meeting others' expectations. As you change, these relationships will need to evolve or they may naturally fade. This doesn't mean you should immediately end all relationships that feel challenging as you grow. Instead, it means developing discernment about which relationships are worth the effort of renegotiation and which ones may have run their natural course. Healthy relationships can usually accommodate growth and change, even if there's an adjustment. Period. Unhealthy relationships often can't tolerate authenticity and may become more problematic as you become more genuine. As you begin expressing anger more skillfully, you might be surprised by how some people respond positively to your increased authenticity. Many people are actually relieved when others stop pretending to be fine all the time. Your willingness to be real about your feelings can give others permission to be more authentic as well. Some relationships may actually become deeper and more intimate as you begin showing up more fully. The process of relationship change often involves what psychologist Murray Bowen called differentiation, the ability to maintain your own emotional center while staying connected to others. This means you can feel angry about someone's behavior without needing them to change to regulate your emotions. You can express your feelings without making others responsible for fixing them. You can maintain your boundaries without punishing others for having different needs. This differentiation process often involves learning to communicate anger in ways that invite connection rather than creating distance. Instead of attacking someone's character, you learn to speak about your experience. When this happens, I feel ... Instead of, you always ... Instead of demanding that others change, you focus on clearly communicating your own needs and boundaries. You might also notice that as you become more comfortable with your own anger, you become more comfortable with others' anger as well. When you're not afraid of your own intensity, you're less likely to be overwhelmed by others' emotional responses. This can actually improve your relationships because you're able to stay present during conflicts, instead of shutting down or becoming defensive. The relationship changes that come with anger integration often involve what trauma therapist Judith Herman calls reconnection, the process of forming new relationships or deepening existing ones based on your authentic self rather than your adaptive persona. As you become more real about your feelings, you attract people who can handle your full emotional range. You may find yourself drawn to relationships that feel more genuine, even if they're sometimes more challenging. This process often involves grieving the relationships that can't accommodate your growth. It's natural to feel sad about losing connections, even connections that weren't truly serving you. This grief is part of the healing process. You're mourning not just the relationships themselves, but the parts of yourself you had to hide to maintain them. Some relationships may go through what family therapist Salvador Minichin called restructuring, a period of renegotiation where new patterns of interaction are established. This can be uncomfortable, but ultimately strengthening. You might need to have explicit conversations about your changing needs, your new boundaries, your evolving communication style. These conversations can feel awkward initially, but often lead to more honest, satisfying relationships. The process of relationship change also involves developing what psychologist John Gottman calls repair skills, the ability to address conflicts and misunderstandings before they become entrenched patterns. As you become more skilled at expressing anger constructively, you can address issues while they're still small and manageable, rather than letting them build into resentments. You might also notice changes in your romantic relationships as you integrate anger more skillfully. Many people discover that their capacity for intimacy increases when they're no longer using energy to suppress their authentic responses. When you can trust yourself to handle conflict skillfully, you can afford to be more vulnerable. When you're not afraid of your own anger, you're less likely to be triggered by your partner's emotions. The relationship changes that accompany anger integration often involve what attachment theorist Sue Johnson calls emotional accessibility, the ability to stay open and present, even during difficult conversations. When you're not fighting against your own emotions, you have more capacity to truly listen to others, to empathize with their experience, to find solutions that work for everyone involved. as you navigate these relationship changes. Remember that transformation is rarely comfortable for anyone involved. Be patient with yourself and others as you all adjust to new ways of relating. Focus on communicating your own experience clearly rather than trying to control others' responses. Trust that relationships that are meant to survive your growth will find ways to accommodate it. And relationships that can't accommodate your authenticity may not have been truly serving your highest good anyway. The true test of anger integration happens not in dramatic moments of conflict, but in the small, everyday situations where you have the opportunity to practice new ways of responding. Daily life application involves weaving your new understanding of anger into the fabric of your regular routines, relationships, and responsibilities in ways that feel sustainable and authentic. Morning practices can set the tone for how you relate to anger throughout the day. You might begin each morning with a brief check-in with your body, noticing any residual tension from yesterday's experiences, any anticipatory stress about today's challenges. This isn't about trying to eliminate these feelings, but about starting the day with awareness of your internal landscape. A simple morning practice might involve placing your hand on your heart and offering yourself a gentle intention. Today, I will honor my feelings as information. Today, I will trust my body's wisdom. Today, I will speak my truth with kindness. This kind of self-compassionate intention setting helps you remember your commitment to treating your anger as an ally rather than an enemy. Throughout your day, you can practice what trauma therapist Resmaa Menakem calls micro-practices, tiny moments of awareness and choice that help you stay connected to your authentic responses. When you notice the early signs of anger arising, you might take 3 conscious breaths, feeling your feet on the ground, reminding yourself that you have choices about how to respond. In work situations, daily application might involve honoring your energetic boundaries, even in small ways. If you typically say yes immediately to every request, you might practice saying, "Let me check my calendar and get back to you." If you usually stay silent during meetings, you might practice speaking up once per meeting, even if it's just to ask a clarifying question. The key to sustainable daily application is making changes so small that they don't trigger your nervous system's resistance to change. Instead of trying to revolutionize your entire communication style overnight, you might focus on one tiny shift, speaking slightly more slowly when you're upset, or pausing for one breath before responding to requests. Daily life application also involves developing what you might call anger literacy in real-time situations. When you feel anger arising, you can practice the skill of quickly assessing what type of anger it is and what it might be telling you. Is this protective anger about a boundary violation? Is this historical anger being triggered by current circumstances? Is this righteous anger about an injustice that calls for action? This assessment doesn't have to be complicated or time-consuming. With practice, it becomes a quick internal check. What is this anger trying to protect? What does it need from me right now? Sometimes the answer is express this concern directly. Sometimes it's take some space to regulate before responding. Sometimes it's this is old anger, and I need to tend to it separately from this current situation. In intimate relationships, daily application often involves practicing what trauma therapist Stan Tatkin calls couple bubbles, small moments of connection and repair throughout the day. If you notice irritation building with your partner, instead of letting it accumulate, you might practice expressing it gently. "I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed right now. Can we talk about how to divide up these tasks?" This prevents small annoyances from building into larger resentments. With family members, daily application might involve setting small, consistent boundaries. If your mother typically calls at inconvenient times, you might practice letting calls go to voicemail when you're not available rather than answering and feeling resentful. If your sibling frequently interrupts you, You might practice saying, "I wasn't finished speaking," in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. The daily application of anger integration also involves learning to distinguish between situations that call for immediate response and those that are better addressed later. Not every angry feeling needs to be expressed in the moment it arises. Sometimes the most skillful response is to feel the anger fully, honor its message, and then choose the appropriate time and place to address the underlying issue. This might mean developing what you could call emotional scheduling, planning specific times to have important conversations rather than trying to address everything as it comes up. If you're angry about a work situation, you might schedule a meeting with your supervisor rather than trying to address it in the hallway. If you're frustrated with a friend, you might plan a thoughtful conversation rather than bringing it up in the middle of a group gathering. Daily life application also involves developing tolerance for what trauma therapist Peter Levine calls incomplete experiences, situations where you feel anger but choose not to express it immediately. This doesn't mean suppressing the anger, but rather holding it consciously while you determine the most skillful way to respond. You can feel angry at your boss during a meeting while choosing to address the issue privately later. You can feel frustrated with a slow cashier while choosing not to express that frustration because it wouldn't serve anyone. The practice of daily integration also involves learning to repair relationships when you express anger in ways that aren't skillful. This isn't about apologizing for having feelings, but about taking responsibility for your impact while still honoring your underlying needs. A repair might sound like, "I raised my voice earlier when I was frustrated about the project deadline. I want to apologize for my tone while still discussing my concerns about the timeline." Evening practices can help you process the day's emotional experiences and integrate what you've learned. You might spend a few minutes before bed reflecting on moments when you honored your anger skillfully, times when you suppressed it unnecessarily, or situations where you expressed it in ways you'd like to refine. This reflection isn't about judgment. It's about learning. A simple evening practice might involve placing your hand on your heart and offering your self-appreciation. Thank you for caring so deeply about what matters. Thank you for trying to express your truth today. Thank you for continuing to learn new ways of honoring your feelings. This kind of self-acknowledgement reinforces your commitment to treating your anger with respect. Week-by-week progression in daily application might involve gradually expanding your comfort zone with authentic expression. One week you might focus on noticing anger without immediately suppressing it. The next week you might practice expressing one small preference per day. The following week you might work on setting one tiny boundary. The goal of daily life application isn't to become someone who never feels frustrated or overwhelmed. It's to become someone who can feel the full range of their emotions while choosing skillful responses. It's to develop what trauma therapist Bessel van der Kolk calls agency, the sense that you have choices about how to respond to life's challenges, that you're not at the mercy of your automatic reactions. Remember that daily application is a practice, not a perfection. Some days you'll handle anger with great skill, and other days you'll revert to old patterns. Both experiences are part of the learning process. Each time you notice an old pattern and choose differently, you're strengthening new neural pathways. Each time you express anger skillfully, you're proving to your nervous system that authenticity can be safe. The ultimate goal of daily life application is not to eliminate anger from your life, but to transform it from something that happens to you into something you can work with consciously and skillfully, creating the relationships and life you truly want. As we begin to draw our journey together to a close tonight, let's take a moment to gather the wisdom you've encountered, to weave together the insights that have emerged, and to honor the courage it takes to look at your anger with new eyes. You've traveled through territories of your inner landscape that many people never dare to explore, and that deserves recognition. Tonight, you've discovered that anger isn't the enemy you may have believed it to be. You've learned that the rage you carry often isn't evidence of your brokenness, but evidence of your intact sense of justice, your healthy need for respect, your appropriate desire to protect what's precious to you. The intensity you've sometimes feared is actually connected to your capacity for deep caring, your refusal to accept treatment that diminishes your humanity. You've explored how the beliefs you carry about anger, that it will lead to abandonment, that it will hurt others, that you don't have the right to feel it, developed as protective strategies in contexts where they made perfect sense. These beliefs served you once, keeping you safe when safety required the suppression of your authentic responses. But now, in new contexts with new possibilities, these same beliefs may be limiting your capacity for genuine connection and personal empowerment. The journey through recognition, compassion, and integration that we've explored tonight isn't a linear path with a clear destination. It's more like learning to dance with a partner you've been afraid of, discovering that when you move together skillfully, you create something beautiful rather than destructive. Your anger, when met with understanding and expressed with skill, becomes not a force that separates you from others, but a force that helps you create the relationships and life you truly want. You've learned that healing happens in your body as well as your mind, that your nervous system holds the memories of every time anger wasn't safe, and that true integration requires working with your somatic wisdom. Your body knows when boundaries are being crossed, when respect is being withheld, when your energy is being drained. Learning to trust these physical signals helps you navigate life with greater skill and authenticity. The relationship changes that often accompany anger integration. The way some connections deepen while others naturally fade. The way authenticity can be both challenging and liberating are part of the natural evolution that happens when you stop performing a version of yourself that isn't fully real. Not everyone in your life may be comfortable with your increased authenticity, but those who can handle your full emotional range are offering you something far more valuable than artificial harmony. The daily life application of these insights, the morning intentions, the micro practices throughout the day, the evening integration, transforms abstract understanding into lived experience. Each small moment of honoring your anger is information. Each tiny boundary you set, each gentle expression of your truth builds new neural pathways and proves to your nervous system that authenticity can be safe. What you've undertaken tonight is part of a larger human project, the reclamation of emotional wholeness in a culture that often demands emotional fragmentation. Your willingness to examine your relationship with anger, to question the beliefs you've inherited about what emotions are acceptable, to develop new ways of honoring your full humanity. This isn't just personal healing. It's part of the collective healing our world desperately needs. When you honor your anger skillfully, you give others permission to honor theirs. When you refuse to suppress your authentic responses to maintain false peace, you create space for more genuine connection. When you transform your relationship with your own intensity, you contribute to a world where emotional authenticity is valued rather than feared. The guardian of the sacred grove that we met earlier in our journey represents something universal, the part of every human being that knows what's precious and deserves protection. Your anger is one of the guardians of your sacred grove, watching over your values, your boundaries, your sense of justice and fairness. Learning to work with this guardian as an ally rather than fighting it as an enemy is one of the most important skills you can develop. Remember that this work doesn't end tonight. Integration is an ongoing process, a spiral path that you'll walk for the rest of your life, each time with greater skill and deeper understanding. Some days you'll handle anger with great wisdom, and other days you'll revert to old patterns. Both experiences are valuable parts of your learning. The courage you've shown tonight, The willingness to look at parts of yourself that you may have been taught to hide or fear. The openness to new possibilities for how you relate to your emotions. This courage is itself a form of healing. Every time you choose curiosity over judgment, every time you meet your intensity with compassion rather than criticism, you're not just healing your own relationship with anger. You're modeling for others what emotional courage looks like. Your anger carries important information about what matters to you, what you value, what you're willing to protect. It's connected to your passion, your creativity, your life force. When you honor it skillfully, you're not just managing a difficult emotion. You're accessing one of your most important sources of personal power and authentic expression. Now, as we prepare to let go of the active work of this evening and allow your system to rest, know that the integration we've begun tonight will continue as you sleep. Your nervous system has its own wisdom about processing new information, creating new neural pathways, weaving new understanding into the fabric of your being. Sleep is not a pause in your healing. It's an essential part of it. As you settle more deeply into comfort, allow your body to find whatever position feels most supportive right now. Maybe you need to adjust your pillow, shift your legs, pull your blanket a little higher. Your physical comfort matters, especially after the emotional work you've done tonight. Your body has been your faithful companion through this exploration, and it deserves tenderness. Let your breathing begin to slow and deepen naturally. You don't need to force anything. Just allow your respiratory rhythm to find its own peaceful pace. With each exhale, you can release any tension you've been carrying, any effort you've been making. With each inhale, you can draw in a sense of appreciation for your own courage, your own willingness to grow. Notice how your body feels right now after our time together. You might notice that some places feel more relaxed, more open, more at peace. You might notice that the relationship between your mind and your emotions feels different somehow, perhaps less conflicted, more collaborative. These subtle shifts are the beginning of the integration that will continue as you rest. If you notice any remaining anger or intensity in your system, that's perfectly normal and healthy. You don't need to push it away or resolve it completely before you sleep. Instead, you can offer it the same compassionate recognition we've been practicing. Thank you for caring so much about what matters. Thank you for protecting what's precious. You can rest now too. Your anger, like all emotions, has its own natural rhythms of arising and passing away. When it's acknowledged and honored rather than fought against, it can flow through your system more naturally, like water finding its way to the sea. Tonight, as you sleep, you can trust this natural process of emotional flow and integration. Feel free to place one hand on your heart as you continue to settle. This simple gesture connects you to your own capacity for self-compassion, to the love that underlies even your most protective responses. Your heart has been beating steadily throughout our entire journey tonight, faithful and constant, pumping life through your body without any conscious effort from you. It's a reminder that healing, too, often happens without force or strain. As you rest here, you might imagine that the wisdom we've explored tonight is being gently woven into your being, like golden threads being sewn into fabric. There's no rush, no urgency, just the patient work of integration that happens naturally when you stop forcing and start allowing. If your mind wants to continue processing what we've discussed, that's natural too. You can acknowledge these thoughts gently. Thank you, mind, for caring about this growth. You can rest now. The integration will continue while I sleep. Sometimes the most profound changes happen not when we're thinking about them, but when we're simply being, simply breathing, simply allowing our systems to do what they know how to do. You might notice that your relationship to your own anger feels different now than it did when you first began listening tonight. Perhaps it feels less scary, less shameful, less overwhelming. Perhaps it feels more like information, more like energy that can be channeled skillfully, more like a guardian that's been trying to protect something important in you. These shifts in your internal landscape are precious. They represent real changes in your nervous system, real growth in your capacity for self-compassion and authentic expression. And the beautiful thing is that this growth will continue as you sleep, as your brain consolidates new learning, as your body integrates new patterns of response. Allow your eyes to become heavy now if they aren't already. Let your eyelids feel soft and relaxed. There's nothing more you need to figure out tonight. Nothing more you need to understand or resolve. You've done beautiful work simply by being here, by listening with an open heart, by approaching your anger with curiosity, rather than judgment. As you drift toward sleep, you can trust that you're being held by something larger than your individual efforts, the same evolutionary wisdom that developed anger as a protective response in the first place, the same natural intelligence that knows how to heal wounds and integrate new learning, the same life force that beats your heart and breathes your breath without any conscious direction from you. Your anger is part of this larger intelligence. It's not separate from your love, your compassion, your desire for connection and meaning. It's woven into the same fabric as all your other emotions, all your other responses to life's challenges and opportunities. Tonight, as you sleep, you can trust that all parts of yourself are working together toward your healing and wholeness. Feel your body growing heavier now, sinking more deeply into whatever surface supports you. Each muscle can begin to release its holding. Each joint can soften. Each organ can settle into its natural rhythm of rest and restoration. Your nervous system, which has worked so hard to protect you throughout your life, can begin to shift into the peaceful state that allows for deep healing. If any worries arise about tomorrow, about how you'll apply what you've learned, about whether you'll remember these insights, you can gently release them into the night. Trust that what you need to remember will stay with you, that the changes that have begun will continue, that your system knows how to integrate this new understanding at its own perfect pace. As you move into sleep, know that you're not moving away from your healing. You're moving deeper into it. Sleep is where your brain consolidates memories, where your nervous system processes experiences, where your body repairs and renews itself. The work you've done tonight will continue in the peaceful darkness, weaving itself into your dreams and into the very fabric of your being. You can sleep tonight knowing that your anger is no longer your enemy but your ally, no longer a source of shame but a source of information and empowerment. You can rest knowing that you have the courage to feel your feelings fully, the wisdom to express them skillfully, and the compassion to meet all parts of yourself with kindness. Sweet dreams, brave soul. May your sleep be peaceful, your dreams be wise, and your tomorrow be filled with new possibilities for authentic expression and genuine connection. The rage you carry isn't yours alone. It's part of the human experience, part of what connects you to every other person who has ever felt the fire of caring deeply about what matters. Rest now. Heal now. Integrate now. You are exactly where you need to be,